Welcome back. So you've got a good overview now of what we're up to, and it's time to get into the content. Now, while I know you're itching to dive into the core of the material, there's a couple things we need to cover first because they're going to give you a foundation on which the new material will make much more sense, and more importantly, it will get deeper into your system and become the word we're going to talk about in a minute is embodied. So what we're going to do is basically learn new material. Now, that sounds simple, but to begin with, we're going to have to take a new look at learning. You're going to find that as we go through this, I've got a whole bunch of new interpretations of most everything. And the basic context for this piece, we're going to start by learning how to learn. And you're, of course, sitting there going, well, what are you talking about? I already know how to learn. You do, but not quite in the way that I'm interested in. So I'll explain. Don't get upset. Here we go. So the basic premise here is we've been sold, the society, have been sold a bill of goods about learning. We tend to think of learning as, it was in school, where you memorize things, you acquire new theories and models and beliefs, all for the sake of gaining understanding, because in that model, understanding is the holy grail. To understand is to know. Makes perfectly good sense if you're in school. Yeah, most of us aren't in school anymore. Instead, we're out in the real world. And in the real world, understanding, intellectually it's useful, but practically it's the booby prize, right? What matters is not what you understand, it's what you can do. Now, we learned this early on working with athletes. They're not unintelligent. They can understand lots of things, but that doesn't mean they could do it. So what we're going to talk about is a new way to see the phenomenon of learning, okay? And in theory, well, not in theory, in reality, you could think of learning and change as synonyms. You can't learn if you don't change, and you can't change if you don't learn. But how do we do it now as adults, right? So you go back to school, you get in on Amazon or Google and find some tips and techniques, and you find a gazillion different books, and there's the technical books, and then there's the core narrative and the fairy tales of telling stories, and Who Moved My Cheese and the 1 Minute Manager and the old Chicken Soup series for everybody. Or you go to seminars. The dilemma is what you're doing, though, is getting more information. So we're going to suggest that learning isn't about information. It's the development of new competence, a new capacity for action. And we think of what we're going to call embodied competence. Embodied means you can take the new action without having to stop, think about it, or look it up in some book. A generative practice is one where once you learn it, you'll be able to do any number of things with it that I, as a teacher, couldn't necessarily imagine. So, for example, if you learn to play music, right, you start off lots of interaction with the teacher, you do your scales and all this kind of stuff. I know this from personal experience. And eventually you get to the point where now you're playing tunes and playing songs. And if you keep working and keep practicing, you get more embodied in your competence. And you get to the point where you can now pretty much read and play any kind of music. And you don't need the teacher to tell you what to play. You can choose whatever you like. There's a whole universe of music. You may have tastes that are radically different from your teachers. And that's perfectly fine because you have learned the generative practice of playing music. Learning is a generative practice. I'm going to teach you the basics. You're going to go someplace with it that I wouldn't imagine. I'm going to teach you a couple other generative practices. One has to do with language. Another has to do with action cycles. And you will work those in ways that just aren't in my scope right now, which is perfectly fine. That's the purpose. I want you to do that. And then the next thing we want to talk about is learning as a social phenomenon. I spoke to you in the beginning about working with a partner or finding somebody to do this with. If you don't have such a player, then that's fine. It's just people, human beings, we learn more in social interaction than we do sitting thinking about ourselves or thinking about it ourselves. So let's take a look at how the phenomenon of learning actually works. We've been sold a bill of goods in the sense that you've all heard about the learning curve. It doesn't really work that way. No. So let me explain why. So while your mind understands, and understanding can in fact occur in an instant, in the end it's your body that learns. And your body only learns one way, and that's through practice. No amount of understanding ever produced competence in anything. Now this is really important because you could breeze through these videos and blast through the workbook and you would understand everything that I'm talking about. You're not stupid. You probably wouldn't be able to do any of it because that's not learning. That's understanding. The type of learning we're after is embodied competence, and that only happens through practice. And it's important to understand the critical role of the body because it's your body that learns, no matter what it is.